UK elections, very important for South Africa and also the US. The Conservative Party has won the UK election. Prime Minister Boris Jonhson saying the electorate's given him the power to deliver the Brexit divorce, is what many people are calling it. Britain's scheduled to leave the EU at the end of next month, end of January 2020. Brooks Spector, Associate Editor from Daily Maverick, joins us to discuss this. Hello to you, Brooks. Always a pleasure speaking to you. And before I get you to unravel this Brexit divorce and what Uncle Trump, President Trump, has to say about it, I want to bring in a few of the sound bites that we heard from various leaders from the European Union earlier today. My team tells us they are ready. If they are, here's the reaction to Johnson's win in the UK.
We expect as soon as possible the vote by the British Parliament on the withdrawal agreement. It's important to have the clarity.
I feel incredibly proud that my majority has increased. I think it's around 57% now, because it demonstrates that Brighton Pavilion continues to believe in compassion and justice and a bigger future. The status quo in this country is intolerable. The inequality is yawning ever wider, and we are now on course for it to become wider still. And that brings me to the anger that I feel, anger that our political system is so badly broken and is still letting down individuals and our country so badly. Our electoral system is rotten to the core.
All right, now off the back of that reaction, and clearly Brooks Spector, good to have you with us, international relations expert and Daily Maverick contributor. What's your reaction? I mean, I'll tell you why I'm asking your reaction. I think if you'd spoken to Jeremy Corbyn just 24 hours ago when he was doing the Love Actually adverts, etc., that he thought he was in for a real shot. But if you look at the numbers, Conservative Party 364, it's some 44%, and the Labour Party, it's Jeremy Corbyn, 32%. Isn't that the worst run they've ever had in a general election?
Well, I have to do the calculations precisely.
That's not very good.
But apparently it's the worst showing for the Labour Party since 1935, just under 100 years ago, which means that they took a beating and a half. And it isn't, as far as I can tell from the people I've talked to and the things that I've read so far, it isn't that the British population found Boris Johnson lovable, you know, like Paddington Bear. They didn't embrace him. But the comparison was compelling. Jeremy Corbyn was stiff and unyielding and at the same time wishy-washy. You couldn't really pin him down where he was on Brexit, other than he was sort of in favor of a second referendum, even if half of his party didn't appear to be. And as a result, I mean, there he was on the one hand with that, on the other with this pamphlet, which was describing all the good things that they would deliver, as well as all the taxes they were going to have to raise to pay for all these good things. And he came across as an entirely unpleasant, less than lovable kind of guy.
And do you think this is one of those cases when it comes to UK elections, and you and I use the same term of phrase, you could even remind me of it all those years ago, he spoke about the US presidency, where it's not so much that Boris Johnson won the election as it was that Corbyn lost the election. It's two very, very different things.
I'd say actually it's a mixture of the two. I mean, it's very clear that Jeremy Corbyn lost any hope of gaining an edge. But Boris Johnson, on the whole, seemed to come across as kind of a lovable rogue who at least knew what he wanted. And
listening to people, it seems.
Yeah, except when he was hiding in a refrigerator. I talked with my wife this morning about this, and I said this was sort of like a farcical version of the Cavaliers versus the Roundheads. I mean, you know, people who know British history will realize that the Cavaliers being the elite, the nobility, the gentry, and the Roundheads being the rebels against the king. And it wasn't so much as it was a blood fight, it began to be very strange and silly after a while.
Let's speak about Donald Trump, of course, as someone who obviously knows a lot about the American political system. I'm just going to bring up one of his tweets, and of course everyone loves to talk about his tweets.
He's had about 60 in the last day.
I don't know who's handling his cell phone. Someone get him a battery pack. He says, "Congratulations to Boris Johnson." This is Donald Trump, the US president, on a great win. And this is what I wanted to ask you about. Britain and the United States, and I'm quoting, "will now be free to strike a massive new trade deal after Brexit, the deal has the potential to be far bigger and more lucrative than any deal that could be made with the EU. Donald Trump wasting no time. He's decided to get on board with Johnson and ignore the impeachment.
Well, I mean, in effect, this has been his policy now. Impeachment? What impeachment? I don't see any impeachment. You know, notwithstanding a mile down the road at the Capitol building, that's all they're talking about. But I mean, he does make one point in that is true, that outside of the EU, Britain, for good or ill, is free to make trade, is forced to, in fact, to make independent trade negotiations and agreements with other nations. One thing that all of this ignores is that once Brexit happens, then Britain and the EU have to actually do the hard thing, which is a negotiation on a trade agreement between the two countries, or actually multiple agreements, because there are hundreds of different things that have to be adjudicated.
Is this done and dusted as far as Brexit is done? He's won this snap election. It was a hard run. Clearly Labour has lost this. Johnson's very much in the pound seat. I can use the term because he's British. Is Brexit done? Is it over? Come end of January, there's no other stumbling blocks for him as far as Brexit's concerned?
Well, the people in his own party who were dragging their heels in this process, they have been thoroughly chastened from this election, because the election was won on the back of Boris Johnson. It wasn't won because of a great love for the Tory party. And if that's true, then all of these new members who are in Parliament now, effectively courtesy of Boris Johnson, they're going to toe the line. This is how we want you to vote. This is what they will vote. There'll be no rebellion within the party because the Labour Party, Greens, the Liberal Democrats, the Scottish Nationalists, put them all together, they can't stop it because it is an absolute majority and then some. And the fact that Donald Trump says now we can negotiate this great trade deal, well, I mean, they'll start, but again, like with the EU, a trade deal with the United States will take years to get sorted out as well. I read somewhere that the average international free trade association or trade agreement takes 7 years to complete.
So this is something that you and I are going to be speaking about for at least the next part of the decade.
Yeah, so both of us are much older than we are now.
Much older, well, at least for me anyway. Brooks Spector, thank you very much indeed for coming in.